Welcome to the Unriveted, where we talk about technology initiatives such as digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and people. Today, this broadcast is brought to you in part by the Word Corporation. That's right, John, the Word Corporation, where all of your words have meaning.
I thought that was the Verb Corporation. Or is that a different one?
Let me restate. The Verb Corporation, where words have action.
I see. All right. Well, thank you for that, Martin. We are joined today with a special guest, as we tend to do these podcasts lately. We are joined by Rich Heimann, a independent advisor, public speaker, and probably most importantly, book author of Generative Artificial Intelligence Revealed, I believe, which is available now. But a jack of many trades in the AI industry. So, Rich, thanks for joining Martin and me today. As we typically do, we turn it over to you to give a little intro about yourself. Nobody knows you better than yourself. Maybe your parents, I suppose, but we didn't invite them today. So let's get to some info on you, tell you where you came from, how you got to where you are, and we'll just kind of let the conversation go from there.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Thanks. So my background formally is in statistics, and that background, I think, colors some of my interpretation with respect to artificial intelligence. As you probably know, statistics is different than artificial intelligence in specific regard to the fact that it's entirely applied. And so, in statistics, there are no sort of external goals for solutions. There's no aspirations that solutions solve all their problems or all problems, like often suggested in artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence. There's certainly no ideas that the solution should or would ever understand what problems it's solving. And so, you really just evaluate models in specific regard to how effectively they solve a problem. And understanding that those solutions are never going to be perfect. There's sort of the famous George Box quote from the 1970s that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so, that's kind of the philosophy I think I take to problem solving, generally speaking, but specifically problem solving using solutions like machine learning or statistical modeling. I've been working with machine learning for maybe the last 15 years, first kind of doing computational social science type projects. Over the last 10 years, using machine learning to discover aberrant behavior in network traffic, so specifically in cybersecurity. And over the last couple, I have just kind of, I guess, been thinking about technology adoption, like how can organizations more efficiently adopt these technologies. I've written a couple of books that kind of speak to that. Most recently, as you've underscored, Artificial General Intelligence Revealed. No, I guess it's Generative Artificial Intelligence Revealed. I'm still
the sequel. That's the sequel, right?
That's right. To come out soon. And that's going to be available on Amazon. It's also going to be available for free on our book website. So my co-author and I, Clayton Pummel, have sort of want to. We certainly don't. We want to, I guess, mediate any consternation of like what this book is, and so we're allowing people to download it for free. But if they want to hold the book, I guess, or listen to the book in an audio version, it's also available on Amazon.
Nice. And in the audio format, did you pick a voice?
No. So yeah, this is maybe a provocative decision, but we are going to use Amazon's AI voice, which some people think that's like totally on trend for an AI book to use an AI voice. Of course, there are a whole, sort of like separate cohort of people who think that's, job displacement, and that might be a justified aspersion. But, this book is, in a sense, a second edition. So we wrote something last year that was on a much smaller scale. It was only about 20,000 words. This book is like a legitimate 60,000, I'd say legitimate books are typically, business books are typically between 50 and 75,000 words. This is 60. So it's a comprehensive treatment of the topic. Whereas last year, it was kind of like an introductory book to generative AI. But we might, so, that was last year. We've got another one coming out this year, which is, a more comprehensive treatment. We may do another one next year as things change. The problem that some of these books get into, especially if you do a human narrator, which I love. My last book, Doing AI, used human narrator, like a human actor, to do the narration. Is that you can't do that easily. Like what the AI voice enables you to do is like update the book, and then the AI voice just provides it sort of like in this ad hoc fashion. So it allows you to create something that's a little more dynamic and sort of keeps up with the changes of the field.
Very
So
nice.
we'll see how everybody receives that decision.
So Rich, I don't know if you figured it out, but I'm actually an AI, and this is not a real human you're talking.
I kind of felt, Martin, when you asked who voiced the book, you kind of got really close to the mic, almost like you were asking if you could be the voice of the book, which I think is a solid choice. But I think the fallback should be the guy that used to do the movie voices, which I don't think they do those anymore. But back in like the 90s, you would know it if you heard it. But anyway, that's off on a tangent. Stick to the subject matter.
Okay, John, moving right along. Rich,
it's like where John is right now.
So, yeah.
So we've got to give him some latitude.
So there's probably some insightful knowledge, sound bites you could probably throw out here for our audience to kind of entice them and give them some ideas of your philosophy. And you did shoot a couple sound bites already, but maybe dig into narrative and storytelling. Statisticians or statistics can lead to a lot of lying. I call you out on that one, but not you personally, but in general, it's do you look at the cup half full, or do you look at it half empty, or is it overfloweth? I mean, how you describe it.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I think anytime you're talking to somebody who's written a book, or even if you're thinking about writing a book yourself, I think there needs to be a strong sort of motivation. Like, why does this book need to exist? And and it's certainly something that I asked myself. But what motivated this version of the book at the beginning of the year was that I thought I was talking to a handful of early stage ventures. I was also talking to some more sort of mature companies that were going through like digital transformations, and they both kind of communicated this anxiety, I think, with respect to generative AI, and they didn't know whether to believe the AI hype or whether the skeptics were right. And I think in many cases the problem they were getting in, or at least in some cases, the problem they were getting in is they were so far removed from the technology, so they had no like hands-on experience, especially in more like mature companies, enterprises. Like the leadership in those companies don't often get their hands dirty with the technology, and so they're in those cases they're reliant on other people to kind of inform them about the potential of the technology or the lack of potential in the technology. And so that's why I wanted to like jump back into this book is, besides the technical discussion of like how these models work, why they work the way they do, like why they exhibit specific behavior, even like the legal and regulatory landscape of complications with respect to adoption. There are like these grand narratives, I think, that exist around technology, and specifically hype and skepticism. And so that's why I wanted to write this book. It's not just, okay, let's help organizations adopt those technologies, but let's help them kind of navigate these narratives, which I think sort of like in the meta are the things that a lot of people have to contend with first. It's not how do I set up a RAG system. It's who do I believe? And I think in some sense we've reached like peak hype and peak skepticism. I don't know what you guys are seeing, but I think a lot of people are kind of we have problems, I think, believing government officials. We don't believe the media anymore. Like we have an inherent distrust in big tech nowadays. And so I think just generally speaking in society, we've got, we're skeptical. And I think that's what, I think maybe the headwinds that AI is facing is, I think, coming from just our inherent skepticism in things nowadays.
Right, right. No, I mean, I've read several articles in recent memory, and I think that there's more coming out about the perceived AI bubble
Yep.
that is
Right.
about to burst, which isn't a novel occurrence. Anyone that has dabbled in AI or looked at the history, knows that it's happened at least, I think, 2 times before.
Yep.
Not saying necessarily the same thing's going to happen this time or to the same extent, but there are different factors, I think, at play here. The last AI bubble that burst was pre internet, I believe, or maybe very close to the advent of generally available public internet. So it will be interesting to see if those things pan out. Pretty much anyone and everybody nowadays is involved in AI in some capacity, or at least claims to be.
Yeah.
And then,
It does seem
before
that way.
that, they were all in ML, and then they were all in data science, and then they were all in data analytics, and, go back as far as you want. So yeah, so it is interesting to see, or at least hopefully what we'll see, how that'll pan out in the near term and long term.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So those are the narratives I'm talking about. The bubble
Mm-hmm.
narrative, which I think on one level is a totally reasonable discussion to have about the investment in AI and whether there's a bubble. There were some really prominent articles a few months ago. I think one from Goldman Sachs, one from Sequoia Capital, and they were effectively asking like, "Where's the beef?" kind of questions, like, "Where's the revenue?
Yeah.
We've invested. We like." The big three, basically, like big tech and the large venture capital firms, have invested hundreds of billions of dollars. Where's the revenue? And I think those are justified questions to be asking.
Mm-hmm.
However, they're artificial in another sense because why does after it's only been 20 months, of course, since the release of ChatGPT. It's why, what are these artificial constraints that we're creating for entrepreneurs and for problem solvers that says that we need to generate X amount of revenue within a certain amount of time, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what motivated me to write the book is on this one sense, we have hype and that's undeniable. Like a lot of these demos are staged and they're fake. Um,
Yeah.
there's sort of this grandiose conversation about like these takeoff scenarios that the models are going to acquire like these emergent properties. Those emergent properties are going to lead to intelligence or understanding. And, those kind of propositions I'm inherently skeptical of because like we didn't create the solutions to do any of those things. And so we're just creating these stories around like, well, they might do those things in the future, but it's not obvious why they would suddenly acquire those skills. Um, but in another regard, hype is good because it creates a vision that's generally positive about the future, and it certainly attracts capital and it attracts talent to work on these problems. In another regard, like skepticism is good because it's kind of the voice of reason in the room, the adult who's saying, well, maybe we shouldn't worry about these goofy ideas about artificial general intelligence. Let's solve real problems. Let's acquire real customers. Let's generate real revenue. But, in that regard, it's also saying we should do those things in a certain amount of time. And I just don't think that is always like a justified kind of proposition because it takes time for people to understand the technology. We have to
Right.
build a bunch of complementary technologies around our technologies. Like ChatGPT, when it was released, we didn't have prompt templates, we didn't have prompt chaining. LangChain wasn't a thing. We didn't have RAG systems. Like all of those things have been developed and required to like build products with language models. And so, I think that's the thing that a lot of people are wrestling with. Is it, should I invest? When should I invest? How much should I invest? And all those questions rely on like, what do you think the future is going to look like? What do you think is happening today? And those are kind of the things that we were trying to tackle in the book, in addition to the obvious things, which are like, how do these things work? What are they trained on? What are scaling laws? Do they memorize the training data, et cetera? So
really, really good points. I think a lot of conversations I have are in parallel and talking about, the wave of, chat GPT seems to be like the threshold where people say, oh, AI is useful or AI is interesting and it's new, and don't recognize this is, 60 years in the making and or more, depending on how you want to look at the linearity of who did what when and how we got here. And the simple thing I like to share is that AI is an enabler. It is not necessarily the product. It is not necessarily the direct service. And so we talk about ChatGPT as an enabler to the next thing. And the next thing may be built on top of another layer. So imagine layers of a solution. And these layers of a solution can then be applied to other solutions that were also in the market. So you turn something of one value that had a great amount of wealth generation. I'm in software, no doubt. So you take a software product, you overlay some elements of capability into it, so you can find information better, summarize information better, assimilate facts out of the information. That's huge. That's huge, especially things with large knowledge bases. So there's more into this than meets the eye when you step back and go, wow, there's a big wow factor. And we've changed a whole generation of how we were working. And what we call enterprise software today, it can't stay the same. It has to be different. It has to, keep up with the Joneses, as John likes to tell people and ask and say, or FOMO, fear of missing out, right? And so that's part of the hype cycle. But it's real. It's real. And I enjoy the realness, but also try to keep it grounded.
Yeah, salient point, Martin. Yeah, when I think about the technology, or even try to help others understand the technology, I often explain like ChatGPT is a raw technology, and I'm not sure it's a product in and of itself. I think it is going to, and I think this is kind of like what you're underscoring. It's gonna underpin a lot of other products. And I think I'm curious of what was going on behind the scene at OpenAI, but I kind of got the sense that they were excited about the technology. Obviously, 3.5 when it was released, it was significantly better than GPT-2. I don't know if either of you use GPT-2. It was better than like LSTMs and RNNs and some other like NLP kind of methods. But it was like you couldn't confuse it with a machine. It was obvious that it was machine generated content. It would just make the most like non-cognitively, non-psychologically plausible. Like it would just fail in ways no human would ever fail. And now, now they're sophisticated and at any rate, I think they were just excited to share it with the world, and they threw it out in this very like raw way as just you just interact with it like you would a search engine. And I think long term, people are going to use these technologies in ways that don't look anything like the way we use them today. I think in some ways we'll still use like a ChatGPT type of interface, but most of the products around the technology are going to kind of be invisible.
Right. Yeah, that I think the phrase that Martin and I think Martin coined it. At least I haven't heard anyone else say it, but I think the phrase of not thinking of AI as artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence is kind of where we're at right now, where the AI itself, or what we're calling AI, is not the product. It is the tool. And right now, that tool is making or should be thought of as a ways, the ways and means for us to complete things that we were doing, 5, 10 years ago, much quicker and much more, productivity. So, the example I always think of is like code engineering agents that are designed to basically, completely write an entire code base based off of a prompt. Now, this is obviously using AI, agentic AI solutions in the background in order to make that happen. But you're still creating traditional software using, code. So one of the things you mentioned, Rich, at the beginning of the call, talking about statistics and how statistics is kind of a like non-deterministic field, right? Or at least when I think about, like LLMs in general, like an LLM, right? I could give it a prompt and ask for a response and it will give me a response. And I could maybe feed that same exact prompt into an LLM, tomorrow or maybe right away and maybe get a slightly different response. So LLM like output in general, I feel is not really you're not going to get the same response every single time. And thinking about that, I'm interested in your perspective on, what that means for the limitations of software tools built using LLMs. If you might not always get the same result every time, obviously that, means that you can't use it for a lot of the same applications unless you have some guardrails in place, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the probabilistic nature of the technology is what complicates the value proposition and what complicates product development using the technology as like the underlying engine. There are certainly technologies like prompt chaining, prompt templates, even RAG to some degree, prompt engineering, I guess, also. Like all of these are strategies to try to get the output to be a little more consistent and predictable, but it is the thing that I think complicates it. But you've seen, well, at least I've seen in the last couple of months, I know Anthropic and OpenAI have both released technologies that kind of systematize the output of the technology, effectively like templates.
Structured
And I
output,
think,
right?
yeah, exactly. And I think those are going to go a long way and facilitate product development with these. That's the beginning of it. I think you're going to continue to see efforts in those directions to try to, I mean, you certainly don't want to subvert it entirely because then you just have a database, right? Like there's certainly a fine line where you want a technology that kind of does some of the relational database stuff, information retrieval, but also a little bit of the generative technology. And it's always like how, where do you draw that line or like what features or how many of those features from each one of those technologies do you try to blend together? And I think that's totally problem dependent. And it's going to come down to what problem space you're working in. The higher the risk of the domain may dictate what kind of technologies you use. Higher risk may determine that these sort of these non-determinate characteristics are inherently undesirable. So I think you're bringing up a really good point. Today, that's a big problem. I think over time, it's going to be less of a problem.
Right.
Awesome. So we're about to wrap up here, Rich, and I'd like to leave you with one last prompt for you to respond to, just like the engine itself. But if you had to slip that in there, didn't I?
Well done.
Yeah. If you had to give an executive a key takeaway for them to listening to this, what would be a good key takeaway for them to run with?
Other than buy my book.
That's a key takeaway.
I think that the technology certainly deserves their attention, and but I think it's also changing very fast. And so my advice would be to invest, but don't overinvest, because you don't want to prevent yourself from being flexible and adaptable to new technology developments. So, what I would say is think of it in terms of long-term positioning rather than trying to be first today. And, that may come with a splash and maybe some vanity in quarterly earnings reports or what have you. But I think long-term, I think business leaders should be thinking about both the short term a little bit, like you should be cutting your teeth with the technology, understanding how it works and how it doesn't work, evaluating sort of like competing problems, but don't overinvest yet. And just think about how to blend kind of like the short term benefits and long term positioning.
Excellent. Well, Rich, thank you on behalf of John and I, the Unriveted crew, for joining us. We will look forward to seeing your book coming out on the market soon, and we'll add links to the podcast when it publishes to where our users, our listeners, can find your product and maybe reach out to you and to learn more. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, John. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Cheers.